rate of change. Rate of change could also be noted as average rate of change. And when we're looking at the concept of rate of change or average rate of change, we first need to recall what we already know. We already know what the slope of a line is. The slope of line is the change in y over the change in x. We also know it to be the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And then we also used it with function notation. And we said, what is f of x2 minus f of x1 all over x2 minus x1? And in this section, this is going to be our go-to formula. And this is known as the average rate of change. And this is for any function. Originally, we just used this first one, and we would talk about slope between 2 points. We would look at a linear function. But now what we're going to do is we're going to look at average rate of change for any function, not just straight lines, and find the average change that is occurring. And so what's going to happen is we're going to be applying the formula we already know to a different situation. Let's look at this example. Given the function g of t, find the average rate of change on the interval from -1 to 2. So kind of keywords with this is average rate of change. So when you see that, you should already be thinking f of x2 minus f of x1 all over x2 minus x1. Now, if you feel more comfortable with y values, you can definitely just call this y2 minus y1. Again, those are interval changers. Those are interchangeable, those words. We talked about function notation early on in the course. The other thing that you need to note is what it's giving you. This is an interval. And when it gives you an interval, this is your x1 and this is your x2. So in this case, when I'm trying to find average rate of change, I want to be thinking slope. I want to think my slope formula. So in order to do that, I'm going to have 2 points. And what are those 2 points going to be? Well, I already know one's going to have a -1 value and one's going to have a 2 value that was given in that interval. Now, in this case, it gave me a graph, so I can just go read the graph. Right here is at the point -1, 4. So I'm going to have a 4 for a y value. And then right here is going to be at the point 2, 1. So there's my 1 for my y value. So I had to go and find my y values. That's also a difference. But once I have my 2 points, I can just go back into what I already know. Here's x1, y1, here's x2, y2. And so I can then execute my formula. And so I can say, okay, well then that's going to be 1 minus 4, 2 minus -1. That gives me -3 over +3 or -1. So what's that saying is my average rate of change is equal to -1. So if I was to go from the point -1 to the other point 2 and just connect them, this line that's created would have a slope of -1. You can also see that it went down -3 like we saw in our equation and over 3. So we're just trying to look at not just creating a linear function like we did in earlier sections, but now when we're looking at average rate of change, we can find the change between any two x values and no matter the curve. Now with that one, we were able to read the graph and get those y values. Let's amp this up a little bit. In the next example, I want to compute the average rate of change on this function given the interval. And this one's a little tricky interval, but it's okay. We're going to do hard things now. So we're going to compute the average rate of change. So in your head, you should already be thinking slope. You should be thinking your formula. Then I need to think, what do I need for this formula? Well, in the interval, this is giving you your x1 and your x2. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in. That's 3 plus h. Now I have minuses in here from the formula, and then a 3 here. In this one, in order for me to find these 2 points, I can't just go and read it on a graph. I'm going to have to plug in using my function notation and find those corresponding y values. So first, let's find what is f of 3. Remember, when you're looking for a y value, you're just going to plug in 3 in both these spots. X, we changed to 3, so I'm changed 3 throughout the rest of the equation. So always use parentheses when you're plugging in. So I have 3 squared plus 7 times 3. See, it gives me 9 plus 21. So that gives me a total of 30. I could just plug that in my calculator. But that gives me the point 3, 30, and I'm going to go ahead and put 30 up here. Now, the next one does require a little bit more thinking, and I can't use my calculator for it because now I'm plugging in a 3 plus h. So that means right here for x and right here for x, I'm going to have to plug in 3 plus h. But it's okay. We can do this. This gives me 3 plus h squared plus 7 times 3 plus h. We're going to have to use our mad algebra skills here. When I square this out, don't forget, this is 3 plus h times 3 plus h plus 7 times 3 plus h. So I'm going to square this out. So I'm going to say, well, then that's equal to 9 plus 3h. Distribute here, so it gives me plus 3h plus h squared. Plus distribute, so it gives me 21 plus 7h. Then I clean this up. So that gives me, let's see, h squared. And then I have 3, that's 6, plus another 7, so it gives me 13h. And then 9 and 21, that gives me plus 30. So what is f of 3 plus h? That would be this entire equation here. So up here, let me just kind of move this over. That means I'm going to have h squared plus 13h plus 30 minus that 30. So cleaning this up, those 30s would cancel. This 3 would cancel, and I have h squared plus 13h all over h. And then I could factor in h on the top to give me h plus 13 all over h. Now, since I factored, those h would cancel, and I get h plus 13. Now, what does this even tell me? And I know a lot of us are not really, we don't really love when we throw extra letters in there and our answer ends with letters. But what this is saying is, if I want to find the average rate of change between 3 and any other unit close to 3, 8 units away, 1 unit away, 0.1 unit away, or whatever, I could just plug in the difference away from 3 into my formula here and now be able to get any average rate of change based off of moving away from the x value of 3. And working with this concept, we're just getting some foundational skills with this average rate of change, and then depending on your next steps, we'll be able to add on to this process in other ways.